What if I told you that the greatest empire of the Hellenistic age was founded by a loser? The year is 323 BC. Babylon, the empire of Alexander the Great, which had spanned the known world, is now headless. His generals, like predators, flock to divide the spoils. Ptolemy carves out Egypt for himself. Antigonus the One-Eyed takes the heart of Asia. Lysimachus gets Thrace. In this trophy room, everyone with an army gets their prize. But one man in that room gets nothing. His name is Seleucus. He's not of royal blood. He has no satrapy of his own. He is a zero, a nobody. Now imagine this. In just a few years, this nobody will be fleeing for his life from Antigonus with just 50 horsemen. This is the story of a man who lost everything, only to win it back 100-fold. How did this exile build the largest state of his time? How did he earn the nickname Nicator, the victor? This is the story of how, in the real Game of Thrones, victory goes not to the one who shouts the loudest, but to the one who knows how to wait. Seleucus was the complete opposite of his colleagues. He was neither a charismatic adventurer like Demetrius, nor an 80-year-old tyrant like Antigonus. He was different. The ancient historian Appian tells a story of how, during a sacrifice, a rampaging bull broke free. Seleucus, alone and with his bare hands, restrained and wrestled the beast to the ground. But that wasn't his real strength. His strength lay in something none of his rivals believed in: patience. He was a marathon runner in a world of sprinters. He outlived them all, dying at the age of 78, and he turned his worst failures into his greatest victories. His humiliating exile became the starting point of a new era. His desperate march into India gave him the weapon that would change the rules of the game forever. We will uncover the 5 turning points that prove to build an empire from scratch, you first have to lose everything. 323 BC. The negotiations in Babylon are a feast for vultures. The main question: who would become regent for Alexander's mentally disabled brother and newborn son? Perdiccas is appointed, but the real game is for the satrapies, the slices of the empire. Ptolemy, the shrewdest of them all, immediately demands Egypt, a land that is rich, protected by deserts and the sea, a perfect fortress. Antigonus the One-Eyed, the most experienced commander, holds on to Phrygia. Others pick up the smaller provinces. Seleucus, despite his status, he was the commander of the elite royal hypaspists, takes no part in this division. He is simply ignored. He receives not a single province, not a single city. He is given only the honorable but politically powerless position of Chiliarch, essentially the second in command to the regent, Perdiccas. For a man with ambition, this was a resounding failure. He, a warrior who had marched across all of Asia, found himself on the sidelines, in the regent's shadow. Once again, he was a nobody. But Seleucus, as we remember, is a marathon runner. He waits, and his chance comes 2 years later, in 321 BC, during the First War of the Diadochi. The regent, Perdiccas, having decided to crush Ptolemy, leads the imperial army into Egypt. The campaign turns into a disaster. Thousands of soldiers die while attempting to cross the Nile. A mutiny is brewing in the army. And it is here that Seleucus makes his first bet in the great game. He doesn't try to save the drowning regent. He becomes one of the leaders of the conspiracy. Together with other commanders, Seleucus bursts into Perdiccas's tent and takes part in his assassination. It was an act of cold calculation. He betrayed his superior to step out of his shadow. After this betrayal, the victors, Ptolemy and Antipater, gather at Triperodosus to redivide the empire. And this time, Seleucus cannot be ignored. And here it is, the first twist. As a reward for assassinating Perdiccas, Seleucus finally receives his own satrapy. He is given Babylon. At first glance, this is an incredible stroke of luck. Babylon is the pearl of the East, one of the richest and most ancient cities in the world, a strategic crossroads. But why did Ptolemy and the others give up this prize so easily? Now let's figure this out. They handed Seleucus a poisoned chalice. Babylonia was completely defenseless. It had no natural borders, no mountains, no seas. To its west loomed the mighty Antigonus. To its east, the ambitious satraps of the eastern provinces. Babylon wasn't a fortress, it was a thoroughfare, squeezed between giants. The Diadochi were certain that Seleucus, the Zero, wouldn't last a year there. But that was their greatest mistake. They thought they were throwing him a bone that would choke him. They couldn't have imagined that they had just handed this nobody the foundation stone of his future empire.
5 years passed. Seleucus, against all expectations, had turned Babylon into his stronghold. He proved to be a wise ruler, and the local population, unlike with many other Greek satraps, began to respect him. But the metaphor of the thoroughfare was accurate. A new, even more terrible war was igniting in Asia. Antigonus the One-Eyed, the most formidable commander of his time, was crushing everyone in his path. In 316 BC, after his victory over Eumenes, Antigonus became the sole master of Asia. His empire now stretched from the Aegean Sea to Iran. And then, the 80-year-old tyrant remembered the upstart Seleucus, sitting comfortably on his eastern flank. Antigonus marches triumphantly into Babylon. What happened next was a classic tyrant's move. Antigonus didn't declare war on Seleucus. He simply demanded an accounting of the satrapy's revenues. For Seleucus, this was a clear signal. He was a satrap appointed by the regent, not a subordinate of Antigonus. This wasn't an audit, it was a seizure of power. Seleucus understood. Antigonus's army was immeasurably larger. Any resistance was suicide. And that night, he made a decision that seemed like the end of everything. He flees, losing everything he had achieved over 5 years. He, the ruler of Babylon, secretly abandons his city and races to Egypt, to his only possible ally, Ptolemy. With him are just 50 loyal horsemen. 5 years in power, and now he was once again a nobody, an exile, and a refugee, knocking on the doors of another's palace. This was the lowest point of his life. However, Seleucus's flight was not an act of cowardice. It was a brilliant strategic move. He couldn't defeat Antigonus alone, so he made his personal problem the world's problem. Arriving at Ptolemy's court, he became the chief hawk, convincing Egypt, Lysimachus, and Cassander that Antigonus would not stop until he had conquered the entire empire. He turned his exile into the catalyst for the first great coalition of the Diadochi. Antigonus was furious. He thought he had crushed a mouse, but instead he had just unleashed it in his enemy's camp. For 4 years, Seleucus served Ptolemy, commanding his fleet and waiting. He waited for the moment his greatest enemy would make a mistake. That moment came in 312 BC.
Antigonus's young and audacious son, Demetrius, decided to invade Egypt. Ptolemy and Seleucus met him at the Battle of Gaza. Demetrius was utterly defeated, and while Ptolemy celebrated his victory, Seleucus saw his chance. Antigonus was far away, his army was shattered, and Babylon was left without a strong garrison. Seleucus asked Ptolemy for troops. Do you know how many he was given? A mere 800 infantry and 200 cavalry. This wasn't an army, it was a joke. For Seleucus, however, it was enough. He made a mad dash across the desert, and the incredible happened. The people of Babylon, who remembered his just rule and hated the occupation by Antigonus, opened the gates for him. He had returned. This event was so epochal that from this very day in 312 BC, a new calendar began, the Seleucid era. He returned not just as a satrap, he returned as a king. Having reclaimed Babylon, Seleucus wasted no time. He immediately began to gather the eastern satrapies, Persia, Media, Bactria. One by one, they returned to his control. By 305 BC, he, like the other Diadochi, had proclaimed himself king, effectively restoring the eastern part of Alexander's empire. However, a shadow loomed in the west. The war continued, dominated by the 80-year-old Antigonus the One-Eyed and his formidable son, Demetrius. Seleucus, ever the realist, knew that a head-on collision with their invincible phalanx and heavy cavalry was only a matter of time, and in that clash, his army was inferior. To crush the Titan, Seleucus needed more than just a numerical advantage. He needed a joker in the deck, a military asset capable of shattering the very logic of Hellenistic warfare. And so he turned his gaze to a place where other Diadochi did not dare to look, to the mysterious land of India. It was an insane gambit. Seleucus gathered his army and marched east to the banks of the Indus, retracing the path of Alexander himself. But what awaited him there was not a fractured collection of petty kingdoms. He was met by a unified, powerful Mauryan empire, led by its founder, Chandragupta. This was the first time in history that the Hellenistic world collided with a great Indian power. Sources like Appian are very sparse in their descriptions of this campaign. We don't know of any great battles. Most likely, a series of border skirmishes took place. Seleucus, the realist, quickly understood that conquering this empire was beyond his capabilities. Instead of getting bogged down in an endless war in the east, while Antigonus devoured the west, Seleucus did what no Greek had done before. He sat down at the negotiating table. And here, Seleucus struck what was possibly the most brilliant deal in the history of warfare. He offered Chandragupta a peace treaty. Under this treaty, Seleucus ceded significant territories to the Indian king that the Greeks barely controlled anyway, modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. In exchange for these lands and a dynastic marriage, Seleucus received 500 war elephants. 500! You have to let that number sink in. Ptolemy and Egypt had no elephants. Antigonus had around 70. Seleucus had just acquired an army of living tanks, a force of unprecedented power, an absolute weapon of terror. He traded disputed, distant lands that were impossible to hold for a superweapon that could win him the war for Asia. He returned to the West not just as the king of Babylon, he returned as the master of the elephants, and now he held all the cards for the decisive battle. The year is 301 BC. The small town of Ipsus in Phrygia, modern-day Turkey, becomes the stage for the greatest battle since the time of Alexander. This is the finale. On the field, according to ancient historians, nearly 150,000 warriors clashed.
On one side stood the 81-year-old Titan Antigonus the One-Eyed and his brilliant son Demetrius Poliorcetes, the besieger of cities. They were the masters of Asia. They had the best infantry and the most experienced army. On the other side was a coalition of kings. The main forces belonged to Seleucus, who had brought his army and his 500 elephants from Babylon, and Lysimachus, king of Thrace. This was more than a battle. It was the end of the 20-year-long war of the Diadochi. Everything was on the line. For the victor, absolute power. For the loser, oblivion. The battle begins. The center of the armies is a monstrous clash of two Macedonian phalanxes, a wall of pikes against a wall of pikes. But, as always, the outcome is decided on the flanks. Demetrius, commanding Antigonus's best heavy cavalry, sees a gap in the enemy's lines. He launches his cavalry in a furious charge against the cavalry of Antiochus, Seleucus's son. The impact is so powerful that the enemy line breaks and flees. Demetrius, intoxicated by success, makes a fatal mistake. He loses his head and gives chase, leading his cavalry far from the battlefield to completely annihilate the fleeing enemy. He won his flank, but he lost the war. At that very moment, Seleucus played his Indian Gambit. Demetrius, having destroyed his opponent, tries to turn his victorious cavalry around to strike the enemy phalanx in the rear and aid his father. But his path is blocked. Seleucus makes an unthinkable tactical move. He doesn't charge his elephants into the phalanx, where they would have been slaughtered. Instead, he deploys all 500 elephants in a single line, a living, moving wall, and cuts Demetrius off from the main battle. Demetrius's horses, driven mad by the sight and smell of hundreds of giant beasts, refuse to charge. The brilliant Demetrius, the victor, was trapped, locked behind a wall of elephants, forced to watch helplessly as his father was killed. Now Antigonus's phalanx, the best infantry in the world, was alone. It had been stripped of its cavalry cover. Seleucus and Lysimachus immediately surrounded it. Encircled, Antigonus's infantrymen began to surrender, but not the 81-year-old man. Antigonus stood in the center, refusing to retreat. He believed until the very end that Demetrius would return. "He'll be here soon," he kept saying. "Demetrius will come and save us." But Demetrius never came. As Plutarch writes, the Titan, abandoned by everyone, was struck by a whole volley of javelins and collapsed to the ground. The war was over. The man who had fled with 50 horsemen had just killed the most powerful ruler in the world. As his prize, Seleucus received Syria and all of Asia Minor. His empire was now a reality. Another 2 decades passed. The world of the Diadochi had shrunk. Antigonus and Demetrius were dead. Ptolemy I had died of old age in Egypt. Of Alexander's great successors, only 2 remained: Seleucus, master of Asia, and Lysimachus, king of Macedon and Thrace, his old ally from the Battle of Ipsus. Now that their common enemy was gone, the allies inevitably became enemies. Seleucus was 77 years old. Lysimachus was over 80. This was a battle of titans at the twilight of their lives. In 281 BC, their armies met at Corupedium. Seleucus was victorious once again. Lysimachus was killed in battle. He was now the last of Alexander's companions. His power was absolute, from India to the Aegean Sea, and now the crown of Macedon, the conqueror's own homeland, belonged to him. It seemed he had reached the pinnacle of the world. After 42 years of war, Seleucus decided to return home to Macedon, where he was born and which he had not seen for half a century. He intended to spend the rest of his days there. He was accompanied by Ptolemy Kyraunos, the son of his old friend Ptolemy I. Kyraunos was a refugee. His own father had disinherited him from the Egyptian throne, and Seleucus had graciously given him shelter at his court. When Seleucus and Kyraunos landed in Europe, the old king stopped at an altar to offer a sacrifice of thanks to the gods for his triumph. At that moment, while the 78-year-old Seleucus was defenseless, Ptolemy Kyraunos drew his sword and treacherously struck him down from behind. This is the most shocking end in the story of the Diadochi. Seleucus the victor had survived dozens of battles, crushed Antigonus and Lysimachus, outwitted Ptolemy, and marched to India, only to be killed not on the battlefield, but by the treacherous hand of a friend to whom he had shown hospitality. Why did Kyraunos do it? He wanted to seize the Macedonian throne for himself. The irony of fate was that Seleucus himself had begun his own rise to power with the betrayal and murder of the regent Perdiccas. 40 years later, the circle was complete. He began his journey with an assassination in a tent and ended it with an assassination at an altar. He lived one of the longest lives among the Diadochi, outlasting nearly all his rivals, and created the largest empire. But he could not protect himself from the one thing no ruler is safe from, the betrayal of a man standing right beside him. Thus ended the life of Seleucus Nicator. He was the only one of all the Diadochi who started, quite literally, from zero. In 323, he was a nobody. In 316, he was an exile with 50 horsemen. But he used his exile to build a coalition. He used his risky campaign in India to acquire 500 elephants, the weapon that decided the Battle of Ipsus. He outplayed and outlived all his great rivals. He proved that an empire is built not by the one with the best start, but by the one with the endurance to reach the finish line. His empire, stretching from Syria to India, became a bridge between the Greek and Eastern worlds, a bridge that would last for centuries. He didn't just win, he created a new era. The story of Seleucus Nicator is a chronicle of an incredible ascent, but he was just one piece on this giant chessboard. If you're enjoying this series about the titans who divided the world, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button, because next time, we'll go back to the beginning of this war and tell the story of the most formidable of them all, the 81-year-old titan Antigonus the One-Eyed, whom Seleucus only managed to defeat in the epic Battle of Ipsus.